Hey friends, tonight I will tell you of a haunting one that chilled the blood of a quiet English village over 2 centuries ago. But this is not just a ghost story that ends in rattling chains or fading whispers. No, this is a story where the living bled and the dead stood trial in their place. It is a story of fear, belief, and a terrible mistake. The year is 1803, and Hammersmith was about to become infamous. It was December, and the winter in Hammersmith was harsher than most. The Thames River lay black and slow under a thin sheet of ice, its surface shivering in the wind. The streets were dim, lit only by weak oil lamps that flickered with the gusts came. By day, life carried on, fishmongers calling their wares, washerwomen scrubbing clothes by the river, and the blacksmith hammering at his anvil. But when night fell, the village seemed to hold its breath. The Hammersmith district, back then a small village west of the city, lay wrapped in freezing mist. The streets were narrow, the houses small, the air heavy with the damp smell of the river and chimney smoke. And the people, they were frightened. For weeks now, an apparition had been prowling the lanes, a ghost. The sightings were eerily consistent. A tall figure clad in white, sometimes with glowing eyes, sometimes missing a head entirely, appearing near the old churchyard and along Black Line Lane. They called it the Hammersmith Ghost. Witnesses swore they had seen the tall figure. It chased them, reached for them, or vanished into vaults. By the end of December, the fear had grown into full-blown panic. And here's where trouble began. People weren't just afraid of the ghost, they were arming themselves against it. Now here's the part that gave the ghost story its sharpest edge. Not long before the sightings began, a man in Hammersmith had committed suicide. At the time, this was considered a grievous sin, and by church law, suicides were not buried in consecrated ground. But some locals whispered that the man's body had been buried in the parish churchyard, and that his restless soul now walked the earth, unable to find peace. It was the perfect seed for a haunting legend. The ghost wasn't just any spirit, it was the tormented dead. The sightings turned into attacks, or so it was claimed. The earliest recorded encounter came from a night watchman named William Girdler. He had been making his rounds on December 29th when, in the gloom near the churchyard, a tall white figure rose up from behind a tombstone. He swore it was no man. The thing turned toward him, silent, faceless, and Girdler ran. The next evening, a brewer's servant named Thomas Groom was walking through the churchyard when a white figure rose from behind a gravestone and seized him by the throat. Groom broke free, but his tail spread quickly. Another woman, pregnant, was reportedly so terrified by the ghost's sudden appearance that she collapsed and later died. Though the truth of her death remains debated, in 1803, rumor needed no proof to grow teeth. Every new account made the ghost more terrifying and more real in the public's mind. At first, people just talked. But talk hardened into fear, fear turned into action, and action, as it so often does, invited tragedy. By early January 1804, armed patrols had formed. Ordinary tradesmen, farmers, and laborers were carrying pistols and muskets on night watch. They were determined to capture this ghost or shoot it. Among these self-appointed ghost hunters was Francis Smith, a 29-year-old excise officer, a man tasked with collecting alcohol taxes. He was an ordinary man, literate, hard-working, known in the area, but the ghost stories had gripped him as they had the rest of the Hammersmith. On the evening of January 3, 1804, Smith loaded his flintlock musket and set out to rid Hammersmith of its ghost once and for all, and patrolled the lanes near the churchyard. The night was bitterly cold, the air thick, with fog rolling off the river. Around 11 p.m., in the dim light of the moon, Smith spotted a figure ahead of him on Black Line Lane. The figure was white from head to toe. Smith shouted into the darkness, "Who are you? What are you? Speak, or I'll shoot." There was no answer. The figure moved closer. Smith raised his weapon and fired. The blast echoed across the sleeping village. The figure fell instantly. When Smith approached, he saw the truth. It wasn't a ghost, it was Thomas Milwood, a 32-year-old bricklayer. Milwood had been wearing his work clothes, a white linen shirt, white canvas trousers, and a white apron. Against the fog, under moonlight, he looked exactly like the ghost everyone described. Smith was horrified. He claimed Milwood had ignored his calls to stop, perhaps because Milwood was hard of hearing. But the damage was done. The Hammersmith Ghost had been unmasked and was very much flesh and blood. Here's the twist. The ghost sightings may have been real, but not supernatural. Another villager, John Graham, later admitted to dressing as a ghost to scare his apprentice, who had been frightening Graham's children with ghost stories. The prank had escalated when others began spotting him in the same white sheets. It is unclear if Graham was out that night, but his antics had already planted the perfect seed for tragedy. Milwood's family was devastated. His sister told the inquest that she had warned him more than once not to walk home in his white work clothes at night because of the ghost scare. The killing shocked London. It was one thing to hunt a ghost, it was another to kill an innocent man in the process. Francis Smith was arrested and charged with willful murder. The trial at the Old Bailey began on January 13, 1804, and it captured public attention across London. The key question was this: could a man who believed he was shooting a ghost be guilty of murder? Smith's defense argued that he had acted under an honest mistake. He truly thought he was in danger from a supernatural threat. But the judge, Sir Archibald MacDonald, ruled that belief in ghosts was no defense in law. A person could not kill another simply because they thought they were something else. Smith was found guilty of murder and sentenced to death. The public was outraged. Many saw him as a victim of circumstance, not a cold-blooded killer. The outcry worked. His sentence was commuted to 1 year of hard labor. This case became a landmark in English legal history, shaping the principle that mistaken belief, even if genuine, does not excuse the taking of life unless it is a reasonable mistake of fact. From a modern perspective, psychologists and criminologists view the Hammersmith Ghost case as a perfect storm of mass hysteria, confirmation bias, nighttime perception errors, and the weaponizing of fear. The apparition fit the classic pattern. A recent tragic death fueled rumors, an unusual sighting confirmed expectations. Fear spread through a small, tight-knit community until normal caution eroded. Cognitive bias, especially confirmation bias, played a role. People were primed to see a ghost, so they interpreted every unexplained movement as proof. Low visibility plus high fear meant people saw what they expected to see. In dim light, the brain fills in details, often in line with the stories we have heard. Once ghost was planted as the explanation, every unexplained shadow or sound was interpreted as proof. The human fight-or-flight response, amplified by a loaded weapon, turned a nervous encounter into a fatal one. Psychologists would now classify this under misperception in altered states of arousal, where stress, fear, and expectation literally distort sensory input. Smith's decision to shoot without clear identification also reflects what modern policing calls the threat perception failure, where a person under stress overestimates danger and reacts with excessive force. Even now, over 200 years later, the Hammersmith Ghost remains a cautionary tale, not about the supernatural, but about the dangers of belief unchecked by reason. And so, my friends, the ghost of Hammersmith was laid to rest, not by holy water or exorcism, but by the sound of a gunshot and the weight of the law. Some say the churchyard is still haunted, but not by a restless spirit, only by the memory of a winter's night when fear itself pulled the trigger. So, friends, this is the tale of the Hammersmith Ghost, a ghost that was never truly there, and yet in a way it was more dangerous than any spirit could ever be. Because belief itself can haunt us, whisper to us in the dark, make us see things that aren't there, and push us to act before the truth steps into the light. It's been over 2 centuries since the gunshot echoed down Black Lion Lane, but the lesson it left behind still walks with us. That we must know what we are looking at before we aim, that fear is a weapon one can turn against ourselves if we are not careful. So when you walk home tonight and the fog hangs low and the pale shape moves in the corner of your eye, pause. Look closer, because sometimes the ghost in front of you is just a man in the mist. Until next time, my friends, keep your eyes open and your candle burning.